Welcome back, Shadow Dwellers. Tonight, we have 3 disturbing Appalachian Mountains horror stories that are inspired by real events. First, a soldier at a lockdown military camp walks out to meet a stranger and vanishes, leaving behind a secret the government tried to erase. Next, a lonely widow invites a nice couple into her mountain cabin, never guessing they plan to put her in a shallow grave under the floor. Finally, a young boy wakes up paralyzed as a shadow man stands in the corner, just watching. Stick around for that last story to find out why the dark figure wasn't there to hurt the boy, but to wait for someone else to take their last breath. Lieutenant Cox vanished during a high-security exercise at a camp where every single entrance was blocked by armed guards and recorded in official logs. He walked toward the road to meet a visitor named George, leaving $87 and his watch behind to prove his intent to return. But the military later scrubbed every mention of that visitor from the records, hiding a truth that has remained buried in the Georgia mountains for over 70 years. Mountains have a way of keeping secrets. If you spend enough time working in the Georgia Appalachians, you learn that pretty quick. In 1951, the Army decided to carve a training camp right out of the jagged wilderness near Dahlonega. They called it Camp Frank D Merrill. It wasn't a place you went to relax. It was a place built of mud, canvas, and sweat, stuck deep in a forest where the trees grew so thick they blocked out the midday sun. Camp Merrill was loud. That's the first thing you noticed. From sunup to sundown, the air was filled with the sounds of work. Heavy trucks grinded their gears on the steep dirt roads. Metal shovels scraped against rock. Drill sergeants shouted orders that echoed off the valley walls. It was a machine made of men and steel, and it never really stopped. Security was the top priority. This was the height of the Cold War scare, and the military didn't take chances. The camp had one main way in and one main way out. A guard shack sat right at that choke point. Inside, a soldier with a rifle and a logbook watched everything. You didn't just walk onto the base. You had to be signed in, checked out, and accounted for. Lieutenant Cox was one of the men in charge. He was a butter bar, a second lieutenant with a fresh face and about a year of service. He ran the mountain training phase, teaching the troops how to navigate rough terrain and handle weapons. He was a good officer. He followed the book. He liked order. He was the kind of guy who double-checked every lock and every list. 4 weeks into a brutal training cycle, the command gave the boys a break, a 48-hour rest period. The heavy noise of the camp died down. The shouting stopped. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy in your ears. Most of the men were just happy to sit still, clean their rifles, or write letters home. It was during this downtime that the visitor showed up. A man walked up to the main gate. He wasn't in uniform. He looked like a regular civilian. He told the guard his name was George. He didn't give a last name. He just said he was there to see Lieutenant Cox. The guard did his job. He sent a runner down to Cox's tent to deliver the message. Now this is where things get messy. Usually when a soldier hears a buddy from back home is visiting, he gets excited. He runs to the gate. He shakes hands. But Cox didn't do that. When he heard George was waiting, he got quiet. He looked confused. He sat on his cot for a moment, staring at the dirt floor like he was trying to figure out a puzzle. He didn't look scared exactly. He just looked off, like someone who heard a sound that shouldn't be there. Cox stood up and walked over to his field desk. It was a rough wooden table cluttered with maps and compasses. He started taking off his gear. He unbuckled his service watch, a solid piece of equipment every officer needed. He set it down gently on the wood. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He counted out $87. You have to understand how much money that was in 1951. 87 bucks was a month's wages for some folks. It was serious cash. Cox stacked the bills right next to the watch. He looked at the runner and said, "I'll be back in 15 minutes." Leaving that money and that watch was a message. It was his way of saying, "I am not running away. I am coming right back to this desk." A man doesn't leave his valuables behind if he plans to disappear. It was insurance. It was proof of intent. Cox walked out of the tent. It was getting dark. The shadows from the pines were stretching out long and black across the ground. He walked toward the main road. His boots made a steady, heavy sound on the gravel. He moved past the tents, past the supply crates, and toward the asphalt road where the visitor was waiting. He walked into the shadows near the gate, and then he was gone. No one heard a yell. No one heard a car peel out. No one heard a fight. It was just silence, the kind of silence that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. The guard at the gate didn't see him leave. The men in the tents didn't hear a struggle. It was like the night just opened up and swallowed him whole. Morning came. Cox wasn't at his desk. The watch was still there. The money was still there. The camp woke up, and when they realized an officer was missing, the panic set in. You don't just lose a lieutenant. The base commander ordered a search. They brought in the tracking dogs. These were bloodhounds, animals with noses that could track a man through a swamp 3 days later. They took the dogs to Cox's tent. The hounds picked up his scent easily. They pulled on their leashes, tails wagging, following the invisible trail Cox had left. They tracked him out the tent flap, across the dirt, and down the gravel path. But when the dogs hit the paved road, they stopped. They didn't just lose the trail. They got scared. These big, tough animals started whining. They tucked their tails and tried to back up. They wouldn't cross the road. It was like they were looking at a wall of fire that the humans couldn't see. The handlers tried to push them, but the dogs refused to move an inch further. They sensed something on that asphalt that terrified them. That's when the investigators started looking at the paperwork. They went to the guard shack to check the logbook. They wanted to know who this George was. They needed a license plate number or a full name. They opened the leather book to the page for that night. And what they found was worse than a blank page. The entries had been tampered with. The ink was smeared. Lines where a name should have been were scratched out or missing entirely. It wasn't a mistake. It was a cover-up. Someone had gone into the official record and surgically removed the visitor's existence. There was no George. There was no record of a civilian car. The military didn't like it. A missing officer looks bad. A missing officer who vanishes from a secure base looks incompetent. So the story changed. The official report didn't talk about the mysterious visitor. It didn't talk about the dogs cowering in fear. They labeled it a disappearance and eventually declared him dead. They took a complicated, terrifying event and filed it away in a dusty cabinet. Think about the reality of that. You are surrounded by armed men. You are inside a fence. You walk 50 yards to meet a friend. You leave your money behind because you know you're coming back. And then, nothing. You just cease to exist. The locals in Dahlonega still talk about it. They say the woods have thin spots. They say there are places where the rules of the world don't apply. But the scary part isn't the supernatural. The scary part is how easy it was for the government to erase a man. They never found a body. They never found a uniform. They never found a single clue. Lieutenant Cox walked to the edge of the road and stepped off the face of the earth. The search went on for days, but it was like chasing a ghost. So, If you're ever out hiking in those Georgia mountains and you see a man standing by the road in the fog, don't stop. Don't ask him if he needs help. Just keep walking. Keep your eyes on the path. Because some people aren't waiting for a ride. They're waiting to show you just how quickly you can be forgotten. They are waiting to see if you will walk into the dark, just like Cox did, leaving everything you own behind for a return trip that never happens. When Harlan County Police pulled up the floorboards of that Black Mountain cabin, they found the bodies of Nora and her 3-year-old daughter, June. The coroner's report confirmed Nora was shot the day the letterbox killers arrived, while June lived for 7 more days. The double murder was a tragedy, but it pales in comparison to what those killers did to poor baby June during that time frame. You have to understand the geography to understand how something this sick could happen. Black Mountain has a way of erasing noise. Back in 1947, those ridges were thick with oak trees, and a stillness that sat on the ridge like a physical weight. Nora lived up there alone with little June. She was just trying to get by after her husband passed away. It is a lonely life for a widow in the mountains. That isolation is exactly what a man named Harlan was counting on. Harlan was a predator. He didn't hunt with a rifle. He hunted with ink and paper. He used letterbox ads in the newspapers to find women who were all by themselves. He knew a woman on her own might be looking for a connection, or maybe just help around the property. He didn't come alone, though. He brought a woman named Tilly. He told folks she was his sister. They looked like a nice, God-fearing pair when they drove up that gravel road to Nora's cabin on August 14th. Nora let them in. In these hills, you don't turn away kin or kind faces. You offer water. You offer a seat. That was her first mistake. It was also her last. Inside that cabin, the air probably smelled like wood smoke and old iron. Tilly was jealous of Nora from the second she saw her. It's hard to say why. Maybe it was the house, or maybe it was just pure meanness. While Nora was busy being a good host, fixing drinks or coffee, the pair slipped heavy drugs into her cup. She went down fast. When she finally started to wake up, groggy and confused, Harlan didn't waste any time. He didn't ask for money. He didn't make demands. He just held a gun to her head and pulled the trigger. A blast like that would have cracked through the air like a whip. But on Black Mountain, the trees catch the noise. Nobody was close enough to hear it. Most killers would have run right then. A regular criminal would grab the silver, check under the mattress for cash, and head for the state line before the sun went down. But Harlan and Tilly weren't regular criminals. They didn't leave. They stayed right there in that cabin. They didn't even move Nora's body at first. For the next few days, they lived in that house like they owned the deed. They cooked meals on Nora's stove. They slept in her beds. They walked past the corpse of the woman they just murdered like she was a piece of furniture. It takes a special kind of coldness to fry bacon and eggs while the lady of the house lies dead in the next room. But the murder isn't the part that keeps you up at night. The most twisted part is what they did with 3-year-old June. For a whole week, they played house. Imagine that. They didn't hurt the girl right away. They fed her. They played games with her on the rug. Tilly would sit in the rocking chair and sing lullabies to the child. Her voice was sweet and steady, filling up the quiet room. June was too young to understand why her mama wouldn't wake up. She was just a toddler. She just saw 2 new people giving her attention. She probably laughed. She probably ate her dinner and let Tilly wipe her face. Just picture the movement in that house at night. You have the rhythmic rocking of the chair against the floorboards. You have the soft clinking of silverware during dinner. Outside, the owls hooted in the dark and the wind rushed through the pines. But inside, A monster was tucking a toddler into bed. This went on for 7 long days. 7 days of breakfast, lunch, and dinner. 7 days of playing pretend. It was a perversion of everything a family is supposed to be. It was a lie built on top of a grave. By the end of the week, the atmosphere started to change. The killers started to get nervous. June was a child, after all, and children cry. Children ask questions. They knew the sound of a crying child would eventually carry down the mountain. It might bring a neighbor poking around the ridge to check on Nora. Harlan and Tilly decided their family vacation was over. They couldn't leave a witness, not even a little one. They took that innocent little girl to a tub of water. They didn't shoot her. Maybe they wanted to save the bullet, or maybe they wanted it to be quiet. They held her under until she stopped fighting. No more crying, no more lullabies. Just the sound of water splashing on the floor, then nothing. A shovel hit the dirt under the house later that night. The ground under a cabin stays dry, but it's hard packing. They buried Nora and June together in the dark mountain earth. Then they washed their hands, packed their bags, and slipped away into the trees like they had never been there at all. When the law finally found them, the cabin was empty. The stove was cold. The rocking chair was still, but the feeling left behind was foul. It hung in the air like smoke. You can still find the foundation stones of that cabin if you hike up the ridge today, but the real legacy isn't in the rocks or the history books, it is in the method. Harlan and Tilly proved that a monster doesn't need to break down your door. You just have to invite them in. We trade letterboxes for dating apps and service websites now. We let strangers deliver our groceries and fix our sinks. We assume a smiling profile picture means we are safe. But Nora thought she was safe too. She thought she was just being neighborly. Sometimes, the person sitting at your dinner table is just waiting for the right moment. Sometimes the nice couple is just looking for a place to rest before they pull up the floorboards. So, look around your house tonight. Look at the people you have let into your life. You never really know what kind of darkness they are carrying inside. And by the time you find out, it is usually too late to run. Grandma Minnie warned Hollis that the Hat Man was the ultimate bringer of death. A shadowy figure that only showed up when a soul was about to take flight. On a night so frozen, the air felt like it might shatter. 13-year-old Hollis found his muscles locked tight and his voice gone. It was a terrifying medical glitch that happens when the brain wakes up too fast, but the physical panic paled in comparison to the ink-black silhouette watching him from the corner. Hollis had always ignored the folklore as mountain superstition until the silent witness arrived in that Georgia cabin to collect a soul. January 14th, 1993. In the North Georgia mountains, this date marks the height of what locals call mountain gloom. You do not see the sun for days. It hides behind the ridges by 4 in the afternoon, leaving nothing but gray skies and dead trees. Hollis was only 13, but he did not have much of a childhood. When his parents died in that wreck on Route 76, he had to grow up fast. He moved in with Minnie and became the man of the house before he even hit puberty. He didn't have time for Super Nintendo or homework. He chopped wood, fixed leaks, and made sure the old woman took her medicine. Life for Hollis was about survival. He knew the mountains better than most adults. He knew that when you do not see the sun for weeks, your brain starts to break. He had read about it in a dusty medical encyclopedia Minnie kept on the shelf. Lack of sunlight makes the brain produce too much sleep chemical. This causes vivid, terrifying dreams that feel real. That is what he told himself as he stoked the wood stove. Inside the small cabin, the fire popped and hissed. That was the only sound in the deep silence of the woods. You could hear the house settling, the timber complaining under the drop in temperature. There was no cable TV to drown out the quiet, just the wind and the walls. Minnie sat in her rocking chair by the hearth. The wood of the chair groaned, back and forth, as she moved. She looked at the windows, where the frost was creeping up the glass like jagged teeth. She mentioned that the shadows were getting long. She warned him that when the Hat Man appears, something bad follows. "He don't leave empty-handed, boy," she said. Her voice was dry as old leaves. Hollis just nodded and went back to his work. He figured she was getting confused again. Grief does that to old folks, and winter makes it worse. Hollis did not believe in omens. He believed in doing his chores and keeping the fire going. "Just the winter talking, Grandma," he said. She didn't answer. She just watched the coals glowing red. Night fell like a lead curtain. It gets dark in the city, but in the mountains in '93, before the light pollution took over, it got pitch black. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Hollis climbed into the loft bed. He was exhausted. His shoulders ached from the axe work. He made the mistake of sleeping flat on his back. That old medical book said it is the worst position if you want to avoid bad dreams. The cabin was silent. Outside, the wind brushed against the cedar siding with a dry, scratching sound. Deep in the night, his eyes snapped open. He was awake. He could see the pale moonlight hitting the floorboards. But when he tried to sit up, he realized he was a prisoner in his own skin. It is a terrifying thing when your brain wakes up, but forgets to flip the switch on your muscles. He tried to move his arm. Nothing. He tried to wiggle a toe. It felt like he was buried in wet cement. Then came the pressure. It felt like an invisible hand was pressing down on his small chest, making every breath a struggle. He did not feel a sickness in his belly. He felt a sharp electric spike of pure survival. He was just a kid, but he knew he was in trouble. He needed to scream for Minnie, but his vocal cords were locked by his brain's sleep cycle. The only sound was the raspy, shallow pull of air in his throat. That is when he saw the movement in the corner. It was not a shadow caused by a tree or a lamp. It was darker than the rest of the room. It was a hole in reality. A tall, ink-black shadow in a wide-brimmed hat standing at the foot of the bed. The figure did not have a face, just a flat black surface where features should be. It stood perfectly still. Hollis stopped trying to breathe. The Hat Man did not move toward him. He just watched. The silence in the room was so heavy, it felt like it had a physical weight. Hollis watched the figure from the foot of his bed. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. A clock on the wall ticked loud enough to fill the room, each second sounding like a hammer striking metal. "Why are you just watching?" Hollis thought. "I'm just a kid. Leave me alone." The figure seemed to grow taller. It soaked up the moonlight. Hollis felt a heavy stone drop in his gut. This was not a dream. Dreams do not have this kind of detail. Dreams do not smell like old dust and ozone. He realized then that Minnie was right. Hollis fought. He poured every ounce of his stubborn will into his right hand. He had calluses on those hands from splitting oak. He wasn't weak. He refused to be a witness to his own end. With a violent, bone-snapping jerk, his hand flopped to the side. He gasped, air rushing into his lungs. The spell broke. Hollis sat up, his t-shirt soaked with sweat. He looked at the foot of the bed. There was nothing there. The Hat Man had dissolved into the darkness. He told himself it was just a hallucination. He told himself his brain had just glitched. But he could not go back to sleep. He needed to see Minnie. He needed to know he wasn't the only person left in the world. He climbed down the ladder, his bare feet hitting the floor with a dull thud. Fire in the hearth had died down to glowing red embers. The room was dim. Minnie was still in her rocking chair. She appeared to sleep, looking peaceful while watching the coals. Her head was tipped back. Her hands were folded over her knitting. "Grandma?" he whispered. Hollis walked over to her. He reached out and touched her shoulder. She was cold. Not just winter cold, but the kind of cold that does not come back. It was solid and final. The realization hit him harder than the loss of his parents. He looked back toward the empty loft. The Hat Man had not come for Hollis. The paralysis wasn't an attack. It was just to keep the boy still. The thing in the corner wasn't a killer. It was a witness. It had stood there and waited for the exact moment Minnie's soul took flight, just like she said he would. Hollis is 45 now, but he never went back to that cabin. After that night in '93, the state came. They put him in the system. Foster homes, group houses, social workers with clipboard smiles who didn't care about a mountain boy's nightmares. He bounced around until he was 18. He learned to fight. He learned to survive. But he never learned to sleep with the lights off. Every January 14th, he stays awake. He drinks coffee until his hands shake. He knows that sometimes the things we call glitches are just the only way our brains can handle seeing the truth. The Hat Man is still out there, waiting for the shadows to get long. And he never misses a soul he has come to collect. He does not need to speak. He just waits in the corner of the room until the breathing stops for good. The mountains have a way of keeping their secrets, but Hollis knows the truth. Some shadows do not need a light to exist. They just need a witness.